Hi friends, this is Major Gaurav Arya. Like, subscribe and press the bell icon so that you get all the Chanakya Dialogues notifications immediately. Jai Hind. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of the Chanakya Dialogues. We are going to discuss how this entire situation in East Ladakh that the country is so enamored with, which the world is looking on very, very closely. How did it come about? What were the origins of this? I have with me a special guest, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain. Needs absolutely no introduction. You know him very well. Sir, a very warm welcome to the Chanakya Dialogue, sir.
Thank you very much.
So you said in a recent article that China expected the US to shift focus from Afghanistan and West Asia to the Indo-Pacific, sir. That is one thing that you mentioned, sir. And you also mentioned that, worst case scenario for China at that point in time was the second, let's say, if Trump got re-elected, what would China do? So in essence, in this article that I talk about that you've written, sir, you say that, China's misadventure in East Ladakh has roots elsewhere. It has wider geostrategic roots than the one that normally strategists are talking about. Please comment, sir.
Gaurav, a very, very pertinent observation. Firstly, I wrote this piece with a fair amount of thinking. And primarily the trigger for it was that I found people were assessing, over-assessing, trying to find out what is the future. 10 months have passed, or 8-9 months have passed. What does China have in mind? I felt there was a necessity for us to go around this whole problem. Instead of looking directly into East Ladakh or looking directly at the northern borders, where were the other connections? And when I looked at it this way, I realized that China had actually no reason to do what it did in the month of April, May to coerce India. It was not an attempt to try and capture territory or to go up to its claim lines on the line of actual control. There was something deeper behind this. When I realized it, then I started looking around and I felt for long the Chinese expected that the United States had been talking of the Indo-Pacific but had been limited by the fact that they were stuck in Afghanistan, they were stuck in the Middle East, there was this ISIS issue which was threatening the entire environment, there was the Syrian civil war, all kinds of issues were there in the Middle East. Mr. Trump was being able to stabilize this area. It would be a matter of time before the US would be able to focus on the Indo-Pacific. And that was always their desire, which is what President Obama used to look at, rebalancing and the pivot to Asia and things like that. None of it had been realized because of all these the problems of the pull from Middle East and from Afghanistan. And when the Chinese realize that everything is stabilizing here, the Americans are likely to pull out of Afghanistan and President Trump may come back a second term. Whoever thought that President Trump may not come back a second term? They catered for that contingency. And to cater for that contingency, it was necessary that they must welcome the American focus on Indo-Pacific with a degree of turbulence, a degree of disruption of the strategic environment. One of the very important flanks in the Indo-Pacific is the flank of South Asia. And if South Asia could be the main country in South Asia, India could be seen to be in turbulence, looking after its own security, a vast northern border with a traditional adversary such as China, it was stuck in a conflict-like situation with them. It would upset a lot of things. No one could specify at this stage as to what exactly would happen. But a lot of things would get upset for the Americans at this stage. And perhaps it is with this intent and the pandemic existing at that time that the Chinese thought that this was the ideal time to do it. So they committed a strength of troops, which I personally felt was not a strength which would take them into a campaign-like situation. It was just sufficient to do some disruption, carry out a bit of friction at the so-called friction points, and thereafter await what the responses of India, the United States, and the world would be. And that's exactly what is happening.
And so you say that perhaps China seriously miscalculated India's response. They thought it would be timid. China thought that maybe India or the Indian army the armed forces, the government, would not take the position that it did. But unfortunately for China, it did. And so a few days back, we received the news that almost 10,000 Chinese troops have moved back from depth areas on the Tibetan plateau. So they've moved a little back, sir. Why do you think China even thought that they could miscalculate India's response? I mean, they had the best of intelligence about us. They have the satellites. They know what we are up to, like we know what they are up to, sir. What was the reason for this overconfidence that India will be timid? India will not push back as hard as it did.
You see, Gaurav, intelligence is ultimately a question of assessment. There are lots and lots of inputs you have, lots and lots of information, and all of us from the military know that information is just information until it's processed, and then it becomes intelligence. The Chinese have all the technical intelligence. They've got, yes, satellite imagery, the movement of troops is all known to them. They know what our capabilities are. But I think where they went wrong perhaps is in calculating the real intent of the leadership in India. Just like we may have gone wrong in calculating the intent with which the Chinese came. So in today's world, given all the intelligence you have, given all the technical intelligence you have, assessing the intent of your adversary is always a very, very difficult thing, most challenging thing. Now, as far as India's intent was concerned, well, we are also a growing power. We've got great aspirations to be a regional power and more than a regional power. We are sitting at the high table in most international forums everywhere. Our economy is not doing too badly. We are looking at ultimately becoming a $5 trillion economy. You can't brush aside a country like India. And in the last 6-7 years, with this government in particular, the aspiration levels have gone up even higher. We have settled a lot of issues. We've got good relations with countries with which we just had ordinary kind of relations. So, at the end of it, and we had good relations with China itself. In fact, Mr. Modi went out of his way. A lot of people criticize him for that, as he went out of his way to build bridges with China, knowing fully well that it is economics which is going to dictate the future of the world. Now, with all this, I think what the Chinese did not sufficiently read is the mood within the Indian army or the Indian armed forces, number one, and the mood within the Indian nation, which was changing. I would say becoming more potent in terms of its own national security. We were embarrassed by what happened in 1962. And
sir, sorry, sir, it still rankles.
It still, absolutely, it rankles. There's no doubt.
Yes, sir.
It's a raw nerve which gets touched once in a while. Yes. So, given all these issues, the Chinese perhaps misread that this is a new nation, new type of a nation. This is a new set of armed forces. This is a new Indian army. And that it is far more aggressive. I would remind you the fact that till about 2002 or so, till Operation Parakram, and just after that, the system in the Indian army of training always in our war games, etc., was that the adversary has done something to you and you are now responding. After 2002, everything changed. It became proactive. We started looking at proactive strategy. Just like today we look at China from a dissuasive angle.
Sure.
So I think the Chinese somewhere, they have very good people who read geopolitics, who assess geopolitics, etc. But to get the psyche of the people correct, I think they got the psyche of the Indian people wrong, the psyche of the leadership wrong, and the psyche of the Indian army wrong. And this is why perhaps they may be regretting it today.
Sure. So you speak about a possibility of an out-of-proportion PLA deployment. You've written about this out-of-proportion PLA deployment along the LAC in China not being prepared for the hard grind. Now, so to a common man like me, who've been fed these stories about China, this inscrutable Chinese, tons of money, there are certain kind of people. We never thought that China would lack for anything because that are the stories that we have grown up on. China is China, it's an economic superpower, a wannabe military superpower. And suddenly China comes to East Ladakh. And China, with all its trillions of dollars and first world economy, suddenly realizes that the mountains are not friendly and it's not easy to fight a war in the mountains.
You see, the PLA is going to be 100 years old.
Sir.
in 2027.
Yes.
They're preparing to be one of the most modern armed forces of the world by 2027. Always ambitious. The Chinese are always very ambitious about it. And in 1978, Deng Xiaoping had laid out the 4 modernizations in which he put the 4th priority as the PLA, the armed forces. The PLA started coming into its modernization phase sometime in the mid-90s, but rapidly by the early part of the millennium, they had already achieved their millennium goals, beyond millennium goals, in terms of technology, etc. But when it comes to manpower and mountains, there is no doubt that you may have all the technology of the world. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is the friction against the terrain, against the land, the human friction against the land, which ultimately dictates how things go. The Chinese, I don't think, had any intent of deploying very large number of troops because of a single simple reason, and that is they've got multiple fronts. They've got a front on the complete Southeast Asian side, on the ASEAN side. They've got a complete front towards Taiwan, towards Japan, in the South China Sea.
Sir.
Putting a large segment of the PLA on the Himalayas and fighting a full-scale war would completely, in every way, imbalance them. And the United States would probably take great advantage. It would be a great advantage to the United States if the PLA is committed completely into Tibet and this region. Therefore, the Chinese, I think, came with a sense of balance, and they came with minimal strength, which they felt could achieve coercion against India. Initially, they came with lesser strength, but built it up to about 50,000 or so. Realizing that the Indian side may not be able to build up this much of strength. But we have done it similarly. We have done a mirror deployment. We've brought in our reserve formations. We have risked certain things on the Western front, but we have deployed in mirror strength there. Now, given this kind of a situation, the Chinese, unless they pump in many more troops, they can't really achieve anything major out here. But now, as you very correctly said, the news has come that they have pulled out 10,000 troops to the depth areas. Why have they done it? Well, my information tells me that we need not read too much into it, number one. But there is no doubt that the human content of the PLA today is soft. They are having major problems in the high altitude areas. They are having major problems in the extreme cold conditions there. The troops of our troops on ground are observing and seeing evacuations by the day, every day, evacuations of young Chinese soldiers taking place. So I think there are some problems that they are facing, and therefore it's not going to be so easy to sustain themselves there. They will, of course, maintain a full stance on the line of actual control, but the depth areas they probably have thinned out to a great extent and send them further back into the 200 kilometers behind to their administrative bases, etc.
Absolutely. Sir, I was not planning on asking you this question, but with your permission, if I can. You speak about the Chinese soldiers not being prepared enough or not being tough enough, because those areas can be horrendous, sir. I've been posted along the LAC, and you must have seen so many such areas. So it's never pleasant, sir, to be very honest. It's not pleasant, sir. Evacuation every day of Chinese soldiers. They've clearly bitten off more than they could chew. They've underestimated mountains. Never does well to underestimate mountains, sir.
You see, one thing we have to remember, and our viewers need to understand, the PLA is not used to being deployed on the line of actual control. These are border home guards, virtually, who are deployed there, and in very minimal strength, because they know that our intent has never been to use force to try and come across the line of actual control and take control of those areas. So they have used minimum force in these places, and the PLA has been in other different roles. All of a sudden, you deploy the PLA in greater strength. They are not trained for it. They are not used to it. From a climatic angle, they are not used to it. Secondly, this is an evolving population of young people, comparatively younger people, who have not seen the vigors and rigors of the past, the Cultural Revolution and things like that. These people are of the generation in which they have seen greater luxuries in China.
They're not the Mao Zedong variety,
absolutely.
Sir.
Right? So it is not easy. While our stock, well, their stock also comes from the rural areas, some of them, but much of them comes from the urban areas. Ours is a rural stock. And I think our troops are far more rugged in their outlook. And the fact that we have a rotation system in our army of troops going up and down into the mountains, high altitude areas, almost everyone gets a look into these kind of areas. So our troops can sustain themselves. I've always had the confidence that my troops can stay in minus 30 degrees and come out of it still laughing. But the PLA obviously is having a major difficulty in living in those minus 30, minus 40 degree conditions.
So you mentioned that, the Indian Army having occupied the Kailash ranges, and which overlooks the Moldo garrison. So then you're talking about, that China at least seeks moral ascendancy in the sense that they withdraw from Depsang and we withdraw from the Kailash range is something that is not acceptable to the Chinese. So they need something more. Can you please explain to our audience, sir?
You see, when I say that victory in this kind of a situation, victory is something very difficult to define. For us, is it that the Chinese have withdrawn from all the friction points and come back to absolute status quo ante, but left something in Depsang, which was a situation which existed even before April 2020? I don't think that will be a victory at all. For the Chinese, would a withdrawal everywhere, their withdrawal also from Depsang, but the Indian army is still occupying the Kailash heights, would it be a victory of any kind? No, not at all. So, at the end of it, you are looking at the moral factor. And that comes from the nerve points, which are very, very sensitive for you. For us, the Kailash heights are very important that we have got them as a quid pro quo. We are also sensitive to the fact that Depsang was occupied way back in 2013. Vacated to some extent, but then thereafter denied us the entry up to the patrolling points, the PPs. So we need to come back to that. Status quo ante actually would mean Depsang being evacuated completely by the Chinese, and we probably pulling back from the Kailash heights, which we probably will have to in case we force them to pull out of Depsang. We have to remember one fact, that the Kailash heights are on our side of the line of actual control. Although one or two parts of them are also on the other side. But the major part is on our side. If we have to occupy them, we can go back and occupy them. But it's going to be a race against time each time now. Because the Chinese have realized now that this is the nerve point. This is a very difficult area. This is the point which is occupied, will give us a greater ascendancy of the situation. Now, the whole issue of moral here comes up. Who is the better army? Who is the dominant army? Which is the better trained army? These are the issues which come up on the line of control, on the line of actual control. Evacuating, going back and yet having some kind of a hold on that place to come back and retain what you had or carry out some of these activities which you intend to do again. That gives you a moral high point. But if the Chinese withdraw completely and from Depsang and from all other areas, and we withdraw from there, for them it may be a come down. That they came with a huge intent. They came with the intent to coerce us, but they got coerced in the bargain.
Absolutely, sir.
In which we had to sit across the table and decide that you have to vacate from here and we have to vacate from here. Who gets the moral ascendancy in that case? So this is the issue of moral ascendancy that I was talking about, and this is the issue which has to be built into the victory factor at the end of the game.
I was joking with a friend, sir, that like the Russians had General Winter, so we also have General Himalayas.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. So you speak about unintended consequences, sir, about India's sharp focus on military modernization. You mentioned military modernization, and I'm reading from what you've written, sir: strategic rebalancing, building maritime capability, closer proximity to the US, and economic decoupling. Then you also mentioned dissuasive forces.
You see, the dissuasive forces, I'll come to the last.
Sir.
But all that I spoke about, the rejig in our maritime capability, the whole aspect of military modernization, everything in the evolving securities scenario would have probably taken a backseat if this event had not happened. What we have to agree upon is the fact that our focus was entirely on Pakistan. It's only Mr. George Fernandez in 1998 who came and actually put put our focus towards China, and that's how the China Study Group came up and things like that. And we started looking at China more seriously. But despite everything, because of the terrorist issue, because of Jammu and Kashmir, our focus has always been on Pakistan, and we were very happy with that. We always thought China was there, the huge, massive country. They would not want to do anything which is major. The collusive part was overplayed, we used to always feel, until this event has happened. Now, when this event happened, what the Chinese have done unintentionally to us is they have given us a completely revamped sense of national security, in which national security is now being looked at much more comprehensively. The fact that it has come in conjunction at a time when we are carrying out theaterization, we were already looking at theaterization, we were carrying out jointness in our operations, we had created a CDS, all this is just coincidental that it just came together. But if this had not happened, what happened in 2020 in terms of the Chinese coercive action, I don't think the kind of prioritization which is taking place in the Indian security scenario would have taken place. So the Chinese actually have created a problem for themselves. They've created an adversary who was not as well prepared, who is going to be in the next maybe couple of months, years, will be much better prepared. Now when it comes to the issue of the dissuasive forces, we have always felt that we had a deterrence capability against Pakistan and against China. China being a much larger nation, bigger economy, big army, we not so much of a deterrence, we needed a dissuasive capability. That in case the Chinese decided to do something, to come into our territory, we would hit them hard and retain the capability of going beyond the borders and hit them too. Sure. In deterrence, it would have meant that we would have destroyed them perhaps. But in dissuasive, we would have hit them back with some capacity. Now for that, there is a rejig going on at the moment. And that's a very, very interesting rejig which is being spoken of in the media. I'm sure we'll hear about it as we go along. We created a Mountain Strike Corps in 2013, yes, which we could not complete the raising of at that time. If 2 divisions were supposed to be raised, only a single division could be raised. An armored brigade could be raised. The rest of the artillery could not be put together. Now what is being looked at is pulling out one of the strike elements on the western borders, sure, and giving it a bit of a reshaping and creating it for the same capability in the mountains. Now, the model exists already. You have a model in the Pakistan Army. In fact, Pakistan Army's 11 Corps is a very, very interesting model to look at, because that's the corps in Peshawar, 11 Corps, which has got a mountain role in the Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, sure, and is also got a plains role in the area of the Cham or the Chenab Jhelum corridor. Sure. It can take armor, it can take HAT elements under command, or it can detach them to other formations and do its role in the mountains. So we can do something, look at something similar, which can be interesting. It need not ape any model, but there are models existing on which we can base it and then suit ourselves. Something dedicated to the east, something dedicated to the center, and something dedicated to the north, which means essentially Ladakh, Uttarakhand, Nepal border, there Himachal Nepal border, and something to the east, that is Sikkim and Arunachal. That means all 4-5 areas of concern, sure, would have some dissuasive elements available with them, which would be available in form of a limited offensive.
So my last question to you is, you speak about a Chinese strategy of, and I quote, sir, limited coercion and attempted moral ascendancy. Also, there has been no visible plan, sir, about this, this summer campaign to follow it up with a hybrid war situation or something like that, sir. And then would it be too far-fetched to assume that China wants to disengage but can't do so unless there is some sense of some victory? So it needs to take back something to the people, because Xi Jinping is not having the best time of his life anyway, sir. Something that it needs to take back. It can't say that we went to the Himalayas, we went with all aggression flowing to the borders of India, and we came back not victorious. If not beaten, sir, not victorious. Because with China you expect, or at least their people would expect, given China's role worldwide, an absolute victory, trampling over India is what they would expect. And now it's not happened.
Well, in today's world, you see, conventional warfare as it is almost something which is that of the past.
Sure.
Well, we've seen just recently conventional warfare in the Caucasus, Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yes.
But that's a very different scenario. By and large, recent campaigns virtually have been more hybrid in nature. Ukraine, for example. Ukraine is a classic example where a hybrid warfare has been fought out. When the Chinese did not bring the desired manpower, the desired strength in terms of its manpower, and apply that, I anticipated that the Chinese would probably use different other spectrums, different other factors from the spectrum of war, domains from the spectrum of war. In this case, their strength, cyber in particular, something which they are extremely vocal about, something which they've adopted since 1993, that is war under informationized conditions, the use of psychological warfare, legal warfare, media warfare. But none of this happened. None of this happened. So I am still wondering whether all this is yet to happen. And that whether the first part of this campaign was military coercion at the friction points, etc., and will the next part be something different based upon what the international environment, the manner in which the international environment opens out, pans out. We don't know what's going to happen with the United States. We are even expecting a million strength march onto Washington at the end of this week, perhaps. This is what the media is talking about. So we don't know what is the state of the United States and what is going to happen. Much will depend on that. The first 6 months of the Biden administration, how they handle it. How did the European Union handle China now? Is China likely to come back into reckoning as a partner of reason with these big powers, the big pillars, that is the United States, European Union, etc.? If that happens, then you may find an easing of tensions along the border. But if that does not happen, and the United States follows the Trump principle of strengthening the Indo-Pacific, looking in a very focused manner on contesting and preventing the rise of China, then you may find that the Chinese may continue to hold on and decide to use other elements of coercion, which I spoke about, and continue. But even if they have to withdraw at the end of the day, they have to, as I said, they must look for a victory, even if it is a Pyrrhic victory.
Absolutely, sir.
Even if it is a Pyrrhic victory. In their perception, it may appear to be a victory, while the rest of the world would actually look at it and say, how the hell did the Chinese withdraw without achieving anything? So it's a very awkward situation, a very awkward game at the moment going on. I think the next 3 to 4 months, maybe the onset of the spring in April will probably decide as to which way this conflict is going to go.
This age-old concept of face.
Absolutely.
That's going to be very important. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, with Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, and he tells us that what China will do in the future in East Ladakh, it all depends on why this misadventure started in the first place. We spoke about dissuasive forces, and we spoke about a lot of factors, like what will China do, what kind of a withdrawal, or what kind of a future is acceptable to China, and why it must take some sort of victory to its own people. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week with another guest. Till then, from the team at the Chanakya Dialogues, Jai Hind.